Story 1. Looking inside. Here, Bertie. Help me pull her up onto the bank. Will you? All right, then, Bert said stoutly, though Thomas still caught the furrow in his brow as they both rolled up their navy trousers and waded out in their boots to drag her corpse ashore by the armpits. She'd been a pretty young thing. Skin was spongy and purple in places now that the blow was starting to set in, but her eyes were closed and she wasn't rotten yet. Maybe that was why young Bertie could muster up the nerve to get near. Still, there was no way to ignore the tragedy of the thing. Not even for hardened old Thomas. What a waste of womanhood. Her dress was thin and white, a nightgown soaked through to semi-transparency. In the twilight he could still make out the dark circles of her nipples capping her pert breast beneath the cloth. Now that he had a closer look, he could see there were an awful lot of tears in the cotton. She mightn't have been from the wealthiest family, but she would have been a right catch nevertheless. Perhaps she's a scullery maid, Thomas mused aloud. There's not a village for 3 miles. Never mind a toff's house, Bert pointed out, and he was right. Might just be some unfortunate that did away with herself in the night. He mused again. Must have wandered head around for hours. Maybe she's from the loony been up on the point. Loony or not, what'd make her go and do a thing like that? His partner's voice was hushed, dropping his half-o. F the load once she was ashore and hastily wiping his hands on his thighs. That, Thomas said plaintively, paying a curt nod down to her stomach where a round, pregnant belly swelled up from beneath her sodden nightgown. A moment of silence passed between the two bobbies as they stared out into the misty fog threading through the marshy ponds that dotted the moor. Bert nervously cleared his throat. Here, Thomas. There's something queer in her mouth. Thomas looked down, and there it was, something jet-black and sinewy, catching the light in strands like ink-stained rope. "Sother, he is. Well, go on then, pull it out," Bert balked. Of course he would once again. Thomas felt resigned to the duty to work some practicality into the lad. The beat wasn't just nabbing street chins and drunks off the road. Not these days. Go on, Bertie. He watched the younger man squirm his lips, bending hesitantly at the waist as he reached out. For one fleeting moment it looked like his outstretched fingers would make contact with the debris, yet in the final second he snatched his hand back, cringing in upon himself. "I can't, Thomas, I think it's a beetle," he said pathetically, and Thomas so read. "Well then, if it's a bloody beetle, pull the sodding thing out and be done with it," Thomas snapped. His partner flinched, and Thomas felt a stab of regret at his outburst. It was no way to mold a man into something braver. He should know. His father had taught him that. Herr Bert listened, he coaxed, this time trying his hardest to keep the cry a wheeze out of his voice. "Just give it a go, eh? There's a goodly tot of whiskey in it for you if you do the stuff I keep locked up at the station. There's still a third left, a goodly tot," Bertie parroted, his tone hollow as he stared down at them both. For a fleeting moment he looked like he might reconsider, a hesitant tremor running down his hand, like the tendons inside were violin strings at street. Opt when his fist clenched. Thomas sighed. "I'm sorry, Thommy. It's the insides." "You know I can't deal with the insides," Bertie babbled, shrinking in on himself. Thomas waved him aside with a broad hand. "I'll do it, then," he said dismissively, feeling like he was begrudging a child. Getting onto his knees in the dirt, he moved to pluck the thing out of a lips and was met with some resistance. "What in the blazing?" he muttered, prizing her jaw open to get a better look. It was no bug, but indeed a rope. It went right past her teeth and down into the fleshy tunnel of her throat. Full of resolve, he curled his fingers around the bristly protrusion, started to pull. There was no give at first, but once he pushed her head back and pulled. At the same angle as her windpipe, it started to come free, bit by bit. There was a good 5 inches so far. "Thomas," Bert piped up, his voice urgent and worried. "Thomas, just leave it be." "Shut up," Thomas said curtly. That he had a sinking feeling in his stomach. He pinched his nose to fight the sour taste in his mouth as continued to pull the rope free. There was something on the end of it. He could see the bulge moving up in her throat, and it was dragging the rank stench of her insides up with it. Ignoring Bert's whimper, he pulled harder, his teeth grit with suspense. Slowly, the winch gave birth at the wrong end to a smooth, slimy sphere. Beneath the dripping stomach bile, it seemed white, like porcelain. That wasn't even the end of it. There was more of the same black cord going right down her gullet. There was already another bulge in her throat. And Thomas was struck by the nauseous doubt if that pregnant belly was even a pregnant belly at all, or just a mass of beaded rope that someone had spent a great deal of time stuffing the whole unknown length of down there, swelling her stomach. Hadn't it seemed to shift and shrink as lightly when he pulled? He couldn't remember now. "Bloody hell," Bert Thomas gasped after a moment, his voice a lot quieter than he felt it ought to be, considering how hard his heart was racing. "Bring the wagon round, and fetch a lantern, too. This isn't an ordinary killing. The sergeant will want a proper look into this." His partner wasted no time adjusting his helmet in a fidgety panic as he took the order, and then scrambled back up the marshy bank to the cobbled road where they'd left the wagon and the horses tethered. What kind of deranged psychopath would do this to a poor young girl, a proper serial killer? That's what. He set her down again hastily, her head lolling to one side as the threaded string flopped onto the dirt like a filthy necklace. Thomas whipped a grubby little notepad and pencil out of his breast pocket and started jotting down notes about the discovery. His superiors would have his hide for not doing it from the start. Upon returning the body to the shore, we noticed an obstruction. No protrusion, he muttered. There was a belchy burp by his knee, and he stopped. Looking back down at her face, he knew the dead ones could rattle like that, but brackish water had done more than just bubble up out of her belly. Now the stomach bile was washed away. He could see an iris set into the orb. It was no mere sphere, but an eye, vividly emerald as though it were painted on. A string of glass eyes. "Fuck," he exclaimed softly, scribbling over his last sentence and starting again. This was a real pervert. They were dealing with the kind of cryptic killer that was way above their station. There'd be detectives and the whole circus on this case. He paused, swearing he caught a sign of movement in his parap. Harry, the eye swiveled on the string in a lazy circle, then stopped and looked right at him. Thomas blinked. Bertie had a harder time of getting the horses to come around than usual. They could always smell the fear in his sweat. Once he hemmed the wagon near enough and lined up to load the body into the back. He lit one of the oil lanterns as night-time began to bloom in the sky. Thomas would be grateful for it to take his notes. He hurried back down the slope to the water's edge. "Thomas," he called, holding the lantern out as he searched the bank. There was no answer to his call. He was a cruel man to test him like this. He knew it didn't make things any better. "Thomas," he called louder, tongue tripping over his attempt to speak with gumption. Stepping closer to the bank, his boot hit something. The girl. With a shudder he stopped and looked down, and the lantern light caught the fresh crimson on the grass. It wasn't the girl. There was a bubbling sound in the water that cut through the night's silence, and Thomas gave a shout and fell back on his rump. The wetness through his slacks sent him into a greater state of panic, and he thrashed like an animal to get back to his feet, whirling round to face out to the water in the direction of a feminine snicker that dripped through the darkness. Lifting the lantern up high, he saw her there in the water up to her mottled collarbone, her blind eyes open and milky white. He could have sworn those purple lips smiled at him before that black, fibrous cord licked at the hem like a satisfied tongue, and she slowly sank beneath the surface. Tommy's eyes were missing from their sockets, leaving naught but wet, red holes in his head. Bert thought he heard a trail of bubbles come up towards the bank. Dropping the lantern, Bert scrambled up and away on all fours until his legs got enough traction to carry him like a man. He couldn't cut a horse loose fast enough. Story 2 would grain. We had found the dresser at a yard sale, beaten and broken. But it was an artifact of the 1920s, and my husband insisted we bring it home and fix it up. I thought nothing of is aside from the fact to be noted that the dresser was not for sale. It had practically been forced upon us at the mentioning of our interest when the words left my husband's lips that day. "How much do you want for this?" Pretty shortly after the previous owner was frantically helping us load the Goliath into our van and stammered a hasty "Thank you," as he turned and retreated back to his yard sale stand. We found this a bit odd, but we weren't completely taken by the incident. He was just a strange young man. My husband furiously set to work and had completed a beautiful restoration of our new bedroom object in less than a week's time, working especially quickly on the weekend and luring me into the garage, blindfolded as usual, and taking the cloth off of my eyes to present its glorious new body to me. He'd curved in all the right places. Its wood was now clean, pristine, and shiny, and the new handles on its drawers fit lovely. I gave him a kiss and told him there as nothing that he wasn't able to fix up, and he blushed and saw it all, and laughed. That night he was more than excited to enlist in my help for getting it upstairs to our bedroom, where we placed it almost right next to our bed. It looked perfect. We could see as we stood in the doorway and took in the new freshness that it brought to our room. Just perfect. That night before I closed my eyes to go to sleep and switched off my light, I lay my head down next to my husband's on our pillow and met his snoring face, giving him one last kiss on the tip of his nose as I usually did. I was about to close my eyes when I squinted and realized there was a shape in the wood grain on the side of the dresser. I almost let out a slight chuckle at myself, but it was unmistakable. There was a shape of a footprint stamped into the wood. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it was clear as day. I shrugged it off as nothing, closed my eyes, and fell into a deep and wonderful slumber. I was awoken in the morning by a blood-curdling scream. It was the first of its kind that I had heard since an incident that took place when I was a little girl, where my brother had fallen out of a tree out in the front yard and dislocated his shoulder. He had called out in such agony that I thought he had been near death, but our parents assured me that he was going to be fine. This blood-curdling scream woke me to life, and my eyes darted back and forth across the room until I met eyes with my husband, who was now lurched forward in pain and horror. I flung myself out of my bed and ran to his side, where my arms embraced him, and I asked him what was going on, and he motioned to his foot with tears in his eyes. There was a huge nail sticking out of the wooden floorboards, in which I had never seen before, and it was completely through his foot. We spent the day in the hospital, and his foot was wrapped as to keep the puncture wound from infection. He was told to keep off of it for a few days and allow it to heal as best as possible, which was near impossible because after retirement my husband had taken an opening up his own saw sharpening service, and so he always had constant customers coming in and dropping off their items for him to care for. He sadly accepted the news and said he would make some calls that afternoon to let people down and give them tea. He knew I just nestled my hands into his hair and told him it wouldn't be long before he was back on his feet. That first night home after his incident, we fell asleep in bed together, but I was woken abruptly by an oncoming thunderstorm in the middle of the night. My eyes opened directly over my husband's shoulder to notice the wood grain on the side of the dresser for the second time now, where the shape of the foot had been marked in the grain. There now appeared to be a different shape, that of a tooth. I assumed that my eyes were playing tricks on me, and I fell back to sleep with not a worry in my mind. The next day I was tending to my husband frequently, in between doing wash and dishes and other house chores. I made him meals and rubbed his good foot and brought him the newspaper when prompted. He really appreciated it. I cooked him up a fantastic lunch: chicken Alfredo and cooked spinach, one of his favorites. I placed the tray in his lap and turned the television to one of his favorite shows, and he thanked me as I walked into the bathroom to start scrubbing the toilets as the next chore. His loud yells could have been heard across the entire neighborhood. My heart was in a complete flutter as I bolted out of the bathroom and down the hall, which seemed even longer than it really was in such a panic situation. John, I called, and burst through the bedroom door to find a mess of blood in his lap and his tray laying scattered on the floor, a mass of food everywhere. Now, given John was getting older, but he was still in great shape. He was 55 with the mind of a 30-year-old, something we joked about often. He was still holding the fork in his hand, but he was now glaring down at himself and raised his eyes to me to show me his mouth. There, in his other hand, were 3 teeth. They had all fallen out of the very front of his mouth. "I've never lost a tooth in my age," he murmured, shaking his head. "I need to go to the dentist, Paula." He was shaking, and he sat the teeth next to his bed on that same dresser. I had trouble getting through the rest of the day. John asked around evening time if I could escort him downstairs and onto the front porch, where he sat frequently and watched the sunset. He asked if I wanted to sit with him but I just smiled and told him, "No, you need to enjoy the rest of your day in solitude. You've been having a lot of bad luck, and I have things to take care of in the house." He insisted that I take a break for once, but there was work to be done. When I left him out there, I worked quickly, running up the steps to the bedroom and over to the dresser. There was no insignificant designs in the wood grain, and I checked it up and down for any inordinary signs, but there was nothing off about this dresser from what I was seeing. I had so many questions, but the point being, it made me incredibly uneasy, and so I dismantled it with a hammer, and I didn't stop beating it apart until it was in so many pieces that there would be an incredible mess to clean up. When John called upon me to take him back upstairs for bed, I did so, but on the way up I stopped him, lips trembling a bit for affect. "John, there was an accident with the dresser." He scratched his head and let out a short chuckle, asking, "What do you mean? What could have possibly happened?" I told him a beautifully crafted, long, drawn-out story of how Bat had entered through the window when I was cleaning the bedroom, and so I grabbed the hammer off of the shelf and beat it to the ground, but first smashing the dresser to smithereens. He didn't question me, though he gave me a few looks, and one of them was the fact that this story had made him quite sad and uneasy. He had worked great lengths on the dresser, and did not want this to be the truth. But sadly, this is how it had to go when we made it tea. "Oh, the bedroom," he asked to see it, and so I whipped the door open and let out a huge gasp. There was the dresser, perfectly assembled next to our bed. Once again, he burst into laughter and turned to me and said, "Why would you play a joke like that on me? I really fancy our dresser, Paula." And then I took him to bed, and I went over the dresser once more before I changed into my pajamas and hopped into bed with him. I never wanted to worry my John. Since we had been teenagers, getting married at 19 years old, he had been my entire life. I had plenty questions about this dresser, but I refused to allow him to see me get distraught over such a thing. We fell asleep talking about something in depth, but to this day I don't remember the conversation. It was important at the time, and to this day I wish that I could remember it, because it was the last conversation I ever had with my John. As he talked and I peered over his shoulder, I could make out a new shape that night somewhere. Within the depths of the wood grain, it was a heart. I knew that the next day he would be having a heart attack, the first and last one of its kind to hit him. And this became true. Story 3. The Magician. The only thing this magician couldn't pull out of his hat was the money he needed to make his child support payment, and so, with a degree of reluctance, his venue of choice changed from making coins appear behind the ears of delighted children to making wallets and jewelry boxes disappear from homes in the middle of the night. With the skill that only a practiced magician could possess, he slipped into a life of crime, picking locks, disabling alarms, and moving silently in complete control of his body. He knew he made an excellent thief, and soon his initial distaste turned into a loss for the excitement at breaking and entering, provided the last time he had felt excitement like that was during his previous career as an escape artist, which had almost ended in disaster when he was nearly buried alive during a stunt. It was once again nearing the time of the month to make his child support payment for the daughter he didn't care to see, and So the thief began to scout around the small North Carolina town he currently was staying at. After some debate, he decided to rob a small place at the edge of town. The house was well isolated behind a dense forest that the thief could use to mask his escape. The owner, the large older man, would be easy to avoid, and the thief foresaw few obstacles to his inevitable success. The man didn't seem to be married or have any family, which made the thief's only concern the various guests that the man sometimes brought to his house. After weeks of observation, he had seen the man return with a younger man and a girl. The thief had been concerned that they may be staying at the house, since he hadn't seen them leave. But after another week passed, he assumed they had left when he had been away from the house. The thief decided to make his move late one night, when he knew the man would be away, likely visiting a strip club or a prostitute, he thought, with a degree on contempt. Donning his hack mask and clutching a crowbar and a small knife, he skulked across the field between the line of trees and his target house. With ease he climbed up to the second floor and slipped through an open window. The thief was disappointed. The upper floor of the man's house was sparsely decorated and covered in a layer of grime. He saw no watches, no jewelry from a wife or lover, no safe, no wads of cash, no expensive TV. The only thing that greeted him, apart from a cockroach scuttling under the bed at the sound of the window opening, was a slightly unpleasant odor. The thief hoped the lower floor would prove to be more fruitful. Carefully moving down the stairs, the thief kept an ear out, listening for any sign of the man's return. The ground floor proved to be as disappointing as the first. Little furniture, no TV, and once again a layer of grime, and now a stronger odor. The odor was very unpleasant, and at this point the thief was left wondering how the man lived there. He was again disappointed, but was unwilling to give up on his escapade so soon. He decided to check the house for a basement, hoping to make some money off this night. As the thief found the door to the basement, he heard the sound of a car on the gravel driveway. The man was home, a situation the thief was woefully unprepared for. He heard the car door slam, and a girl ask if she could see the puppy. Must be his daughter. The thief thought of bolting for the steps to the second floor, but the door to the outside was between him and the steps. The thief didn't want to risk it. What if the man saw him? What if he had a gun? Never before had the thief robbed a home with the homeowner there. Never before had the thief been faced with the prospect of getting caught. The thrill of this turn of events was unparalleled, even by his time as an escape artist. Keys rattled in the door, and as the door began to open, the thief stepped into the basement to hide, confident he could soon make his escape. The stench was overpowering. The thief gagged and then retched. He stumbled down the stairs, suddenly afraid that he would be caught. Suddenly afraid that the man had heard him. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he entered hell. A furnace, meat hooks, a fire hose, chains, and a stack of large wooden boxes. Concrete walls covered in a brown stain that no amount of water could clean. By the furnace, neatly arrayed in a tub, piles of bones. Small bones. The thief did not believe in God, but he found himself praying. He prayed that they were animal bones. He saw that they weren't. He saw a pile of clothes neatly stacked in a corner. Clothes from men and women of various sizes, a man's plaid shirt, a girl's flowered dress, the smell of iron and fear and despair. The thrill was gone. All that was left were his cold, shaking hands, his crowbar, the cold sweat on his forehead, and the small knife in his pocket. The scream echoed down the steps, followed by the sound of tape. The door to the basement swung open, and the man began to descend, dragging his latest prize, another young girl, no more than 11, kidnapped from a playground, now bruised, bloody, and wrapped in duct tape. The girl was crying out for her parents, struggling to escape. She stopped struggling when the man hit her again hard across her face. She didn't struggle when the man chained her to the wall. She didn't even struggle when he ripped off her dress. The thief was silent, crouched behind the pile of wooden boxes. He didn't want to know what was in those boxes. The man knew he wasn't alone in the basement with his new prize. He had heard the thief retch, and after glancing around, he knew the thief was hiding in the only spot available behind the boxes. This did not worry the man at all. Rather, he relished the idea of having another plaything. The only thought that gave him pause was the difficulty that came with dealing with an adult's struggles. They always fought harder than the kids. Maybe it's because the kids thought there was some hope, and the adults knew there wasn't. The man decided that he should soften his new company up. Some time in a box should do it. Maybe he would just let his new company stay in the box overnight. After all, he already had one live one. After chaining the girl to the wall, the man charged at the pile of boxes and threw his body at them, pushing the boxes against the wall and trapping the thief. He walked around the corner, looked into the panicking eyes, and slammed his knee into the thief's head, knocking the thief unconscious. The thief awoke in darkness. He was chained in fetal position in a dark, claustrophobic place. He could hardly breathe. He knew where he was. He remembered the trick that almost killed him. He was buried alive. The thief began to panic, and as he hyperventilated, the low amount of oxygen present in his tomb decreased even further. He began to feel lethargic. He knew he had to do something. He did. With practiced ease, the magician slipped his hands out of his chains, using the small knife still in his back pocket. He unlocked the shackles around his ankles, but he was still buried alive. He could do no more. The magician thought to be back to his family, to the wife he had failed, and the girl he had neglected. He thought about the young girl chained to a wall, terrified. He thought of the little girl's father, who may be Lee Cahem, who may never get a chance to see his daughter again. The thief died, the magician died, the father survived. Still crouched in the claustrophobic box, he braced his back against the top and began to ch. Boards creaked, muscles tore, tendons reached their breaking point, and earth began to move. He stood up, forcing wooden planks and earth aside, and let out a scream. It was not a sound that prey makes. The man heard the scream, and for the first time in his life felt afraid. He grabbed a sawed-off shotgun from inside his nightstand and went outside to inspect the shallow grave. As the man passed through his back door, he saw the beast emerging from the ground, hunched over and covered in dirt, with a predatory glint in its eye. The man lowered his shotgun and fired both barrels. The man missed. He wouldn't get another chance. The little girl was woken up by the sounds of screams and a gunshot. She was still chained to the wall, but apart from the bruise, S had been left unharmed. while the bad man had dealt with the other one. Now, though, she was trembling. The first scream had possessed a quality that scared her. It had sounded angry. The ones that followed the gunshot were those of desperation and pain. The little girl heard the basement door open. She heard someone coming down the steps and began to cry at the thought of what the bad man might do to her. A man was crouched before her, wiping her tears away. Practiced hands were unchaining her. A coat was draped over her. A dress was placed in her lap. When she looked up, she saw kind eyes. The father picked her up and carried her out of the basement into the rest of her life. Story 4. My sister brought home a clown. I grew up with a healthy fear of clowns. I'd say could have been because of Stephen King, could have been because of John Wayne Gacy, could have just been because they're fucking creepy looking. My family has never let me live it down, so it shouldn't have been a surprise to me when I walked into our house one day to see a 7-foot animatronic clown peering at me from the corner of the living room. A sign hung around his neck, had read free hugs. I felt my eyebrows scrunched together in disgust and walked off to bed. It was too late for me to be dealing with this. The following morning, I was startled to wake by a high pitch and crazed laughter. For a moment I felt my legs seize up. Before remembering, I walked into the room to see my 18-year-old sister, Lily, stepping on a little pad connected to the clown and giggling along. She with it as it reached its robotic arms out to pretend. Grab her. She noticed me and giggled even harder. I got him at the Halloween store. Yippee, I said as I peered over at the frozen figure towering over us both. His name is Giggles. Dad said we're gonna move him into your room once Halloween is over. She smirked. I did not. She left for work quickly after and told Emmy to have fun with Giggles, once again breaking out into laughter. I didn't study him too hard last night, but now as I stepped back and really noticed his face, my legs once again start to feel knees. His eyes were yellow and almost cat-like, with purple diamond makeup surrounding them. A goofy white smile permanently painted on. Wild purple hair to match the purple and blooded outfit he had on. A fake deck of cards rest in his pocket. Other than his eyes, his face looked weirdly human. Usually the animatronics you see in haunted houses and Halloween stores just resemble giant, kinda creepy dolls, but Giggles looks like he walked straight out of a freak show and into my home. I chalked it up to the advancement in technology and went back to bed. I dreamed of Giggles, happing my spine, my body a broken, mangled mess, his smile still frozen. I woke up to laughter once again. This time I sighed. Was this going to be a new routine? Mom was in the living room, reading on the couch. I sat down next to her and, without looking up, she said, "The stupid thing has gone off on its own twice since I got out here. Ha." I muttered, thinking she was just teasing me. As soon as the sarcastic laugh had left my mouth, Giggles' yellow eyes lit, and his arms stretched forward. "Oh, you were a little fast. I'll get you next time," Giggles cried in his high voice, followed by the same laugh I'd been woken up to twice earlier. I noticed Mom shoot me her "I told you so" look out of the corner of my eye, but I remained fixated on Giggles. Animatronics' mouths usually open and form words so perfectly. Maybe he's on a motion sensor. I walked over and swung my arms a few times. Nothing other than how his eyes seemed to follow my arms. I looked over at Mom and frowned, thinking about how I already want to get rid of this stupid thing. No, Lily bought that pad thing so she didn't need to turn the sensor on. I was still skeptical, or maybe I just wanted Mom to be wrong. I reached behind Giggles to look at the wires connected to him and saw she wasn't. Motion sensors were off. As soon as I let go of Giggles, the yellow eyes flared up again, and as the robotic hands reached out, one got caught on my arm. Then I felt a light squeeze as the clown yelled, "Come a little closer. I've got games." "And hugs," I gasped, and jumped back as he gleefully laughed, then went. I heard Giggles laughing as I closed my door. Ever since Giggles moved into the living room, my circadian rhythm seemed to be the only thing that hadn't been waking me up. This time it wasn't laughter. It was my dog. My eyes fluttered open, hearing a slight whimper in my ear. My 110 pounds Saint Bernard was staring back at me, her weapon, and of a tail whipping my legs with every wag. "What you're doing, Bob?" Charity usually only sleeps in Mom's room, but any time she hears something that scares her, it's my bee. She ends up in. This particular night the sound happened to be thunder, as lightning broke through the heavy clouds and briefly brightened my room. I pat her head. Thunder cracked again, and when my room was lit up this time, I noticed something in my mirror. I grabbed the flashlight on my nightstand. I squinted as my eyes adjusted and noticed my reflection twist its face in horror. Written on the wall behind my bed in big purple letters, "Come a little closer." Thunder loudly filled my ears, as well as laughter from the other room. Maybe it wasn't the storm that scared my dog. The next few days came and went. There were small things happening, only I seemed to notice. One morning I noticed Giggles' white gloves were splattered with what looked like dried blood. Later I found a mutilated, dead bird on our deck. The next day, Giggles was facing a little more to the right than usual, and I found a joker card sitting on my bed later on. Giggles continuously went off F on his own. I thought I was going crazy, but that didn't stop me from constantly feeling on edge. Then Friday came, date night for my parents. Lily was working a third shift. I was alone. Well, I was with Giggles. 10 o'clock came. I kept Charity in my room, not 'cause she was scared, but because I was. Laughter erupted from the living room a couple times, and I shivered. I turned up the volume on my TV. 11:30. More laughter. Closer this time. Then again, right outside my door. I held my breath. Charity was fast asleep under my bed. I listened. Silence. Then I heard scratching. "Come a little closer." This voice was not the usual one. It was still high-pitched, but it was quieter, teasing me. I fumbled around in my bed trying to find my phone. I texted Mom and told her to call 911. Then I reached into my nightstand drawer. The scratching turned into knocking, and I searched frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. "Come a little closer, little closer." Giggles snickered. I found a pocket knife. I clutched it tightly. Giggles was now pounding at the door, the knob rattling viciously as he howled with wild laughter. "If you don't come closer, I will," he screeched. Then nothing. The door stopped shaking. The knob sat still. Charity was now sitting at the foot of my bed, the hair on her neck standing. I didn't dare to move. Suddenly the door broke off its hinges, collapsing loudly against my floor. I cried out loudly and fright as I stared straight into hollow yellow eyes. He stood there, not moving, just smiling and staring. But this wasn't his normal, robotic position. He was alive. He was staring me down. He was going to kill me. His lips formed into a pout, though his makeup still rested in an ugly grin. "What's the matter? You don't want a hug." His shrieking laugh pierced my ears. Charity let out a low growl. That's when he barreled towards me, his already blooded gloves grabbed a hold of my arm. He leaned in close, his eyes burned. My heart was beating so hard I thought it'd break my ribs. "Now we can play a game. We'll see how much of you breaks before." Reudie, I heard it before I felt it, the crunch that could have been a tree branch being stepped on, but instead it was my arm being snapped. The pain radiated through my body and I screamed. I couldn't hear myself. Half over giggles, laughing out in joy, I stared down at the bone, broken and jutting out of my body, blood soaking my sheets and ripping onto the carpet. Giggles had left what looked like a burn in the shape of his hands on my skin. I cried, paralyzed. That's when Charity jumped. I went to yell out to her, not wanting her to meet the same fate. But she caught Giggles by surprise, clamping down on his shoulder and ripping the arm right out of its socket. It dropped heavily on the floor, and Charity barked as sirens could also be heard wailing in the distance. Giggles started towards Charity, then stopped and looked at me instead. His mouth curled into a horrible smile, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll keep close. We can finish the game soon." And out of the room, and I saw blue and red flashes coming from outside my window. A few minutes later, Giggles was never found. The police probably thought I was crazy. My family, too. But no one ever said anything. After all, how could you explain the burn marks on my arm, the broken bone, my dog refusing to leave my side, and the robot's lifeless arm beside her? Charity sleeps by me every night now, and no one has brought a clown into this house since, which is weird because sometimes I do hear one giggling. Story 5. The Things Without Feelings. It's odd the things we remember sometimes. I was walking down the toy aisle a couple days ago, looking for something to give my soon-to-be 3-year-old niece for her birthday. Everything was brightly colored and cheerful, starting with a turtle with a head that bobbed up and down when you pulled his tail, and ending with what looked like a mashup between a dragon and a fairy princess colored all in pink. And there, dead center, in the middle of the aisle, was a loosely gathered bunch of Care Bear toys, cloying and sweet. Their eyes stared up at me, as if to say what a wonderful gift they would be for a small girl of 3. I reached down and picked up the dark blue grumpy bear. Of all the bears, he has gone through the least changes over the years. I think it's because his mind is the strongest he's had. No need to change his shape or form to keep his sanity. I put the bear back down and gazed at it. Odd thing to think. But then it was an odd Care Bear tale I had seen too, or maybe thought I saw. The whole thing has the quality of a fever dream to it, which is appropriate since I was sick at the time. And as I looked at the little storm cloud on his tummy, I remembered it was a sunny March afternoon. A temperature of 101 and vomiting had kept me home from school that day. I had passed the worst stages of my sickness earlier in the morning, and I was now thoroughly enjoying myself on the cool sea edge, consuming anything the TV would throw my way. My mom had left to run some errands, so I was alone in the house. Normally, I would have abused this freedom by raiding some ice cream out of the freezer. I was too tired, though, and still felt slightly nauseous. That might to explain why I didn't change the channel when the brightly colored bears came on. At 9 years old, I had far passed the age where Care Bears would have been an okay thing to watch, but tired and still slightly sick, I let it play. I remember the villain was someone called Professor Coldheart. He looked like a cheap Mr. Freeze knockoff with frozen blue skin, white hair, and a pedo stare. His whole thing was that he hated feelings because, honestly, he reminds me now of one of those stupid Captain Planet villains. Why did they pollute the environment? Because if they didn't, there wouldn't be a villain to fight, duh. Maybe I'm expecting too much out of a show aimed at toddlers, though there was a lot of back and forth about feelings with the fuzzy little mascots going on and on about joy and caring. And sick or not, I was getting up to change the channel because I was going to be sick if I had to hear to the word caring one more time. And then Professor Coldheart pulled out a large black book. But they have promised me, if I call them, they will end all feelings, Coldheart exclaimed, opening the book. The little bears all seemed confused, all except Grumpy Bear. Care Bears. Don't let him read from that book, he exclaimed. Tender Heart, call for tea. He stared. A little reddish-brown bear with a heart on his tummy nodded. Care Bears, line up, he called. But even as he did, Coldheart began to chant. I sat on the floor and watched. Wide-eyed, I didn't understand a word he was saying. No, that's a lie, or rather, it's not entirely true. He wasn't speaking English. He wasn't speaking any language I've ever heard, but my mind was forming pictures, and they weren't happy. They involve large black masses that hate the stars and writhing and squirming things long enough to wrap around the world. Tender Heart faltered, with a hand to his head, and the other bears quickly followed suit. They lie in wait for the stars, I heard Tender Heart mutter. A cavernous portal opened behind Coldheart, and he giggled a giggle full of madness and no glee. Grumpy Bear stood up and stared at it in horror. Shadowy things that flickered on the edge of vision began to appear on the screen, coming from the opening. Looking back, it was some fantastic animation. I haven't seen its like since. The shadowy things were reaching forward for the bears. Grumpy Bear's tummy glowed, and he summoned forth several thunder clouds. He used them to set up a protective barrier for the bears, lightning arcing from them and sizzling the shadowy things as they closed in. It wasn't going to be enough, though, and although I would have been ashamed to admit, my little 9-year-old self was kind of scared. The shadowy things bore a very strange resemblance to things flicking through my own head now. Grumpy Bear looked from Coldheart to tea. He bears, and then, I swear to God, straight at me. I know he was just animated to be looking at the camera, but it felt like he could see me and whoever else was watching. Feel our fear. He nodded. I have to break the connection, he said, turning back to Coldheart. He closed his eyes and concentrated, tummy lighting up brighter than I had ever seen. A gigantic thunder cloud appeared above them, filling the entire building. Cold Heart looked up at it in awe. Then a gigantic lightning strike fell from the cloud. At first I thought it was going to strike Cold Heart. Instead, it fell at his feet. He screeched and jumped backwards, losing his balance. And when he did, he fell backwards into the portal behind him, still holding the black book. There was a mighty clap of thunder, and the screen turned white. For a moment I wondered if we'd had a power surge that hurt the TV. After a few moments it cleared, though. Grumpy Bear was going to each bear now, picking them off the floor, patting them on the back, saying a few encouraging words. I can't live with it. A green bear with a clover on his belly said, I saw things, so many things. Don't worry. Good luck, Grumpy sighed, patting the bear's back. You won't have to. None of you will. Then it rolled to us. I crawled back over to the couch and hauled myself back up. I was slightly disappointed. I wanted to know what Grumpy meant, but I pushed it from my mind. It was just a Care Bear episode after all. I remember the first movie came out slightly afterwards, serving as a sort of reboot to the franchise. No more Cold Heart, and a whole bunch of different pastel-colored animals to play with along with bears. I never saw the episode again, and never both. Read Seeking It Out. 13 years later found me an English literature class at an out-of-state college. It was one of those classes where everyone from freshmen to seniors could be found in it. IW, as in my senior year, and had just needed a random class to fill out my general education block. For some reason, at the end of class, a bunch of us got to talking about shows we used to watch when we're little. The subject eventually turned to the Care Bears. You know, I saw the strangest episode when I was 9, I said. I quickly outlined the dramatics with Cold Heart and the book. Everyone stared at me like I had gone off my gourd. Are you sure you just didn't hallucinate it? A guy to my right, we called the Patster, said. Wait, he's right, a blonde freshman named Kelly exclaimed. But it wasn't Cold Heart. It was No Heart. Who the heck is No Heart? I asked, turning to her. He's the main villain from the Nelvana series, the one that came after the Dig episodes. He had a black book, like you said, and all the bears seemed confused except Grumpy. He was flipping out, and No Heart called all his shadowy monster things the young ones. Gee, Lao, kid, I don't know how it ended. It actually scared me enough I changed the channel. She shook her head. It was Care Bears, though, so how bad could it have been? She became thoughtful for a second. It was near the end of the Nelvana run, though. Might have even been the last episode. Yeah, I vote both of you are nutty than the nut house, Patster said, and the group laughed in agreement. The conversation piqued my curiosity, though. The school had some computers that were free for students to use that ran at the blazing fast dial-up speed of 56 kbps. This was back in 1998, so the internet was not the instance or place it is now. Hell, Google was still called Google Beta, and I viewed it with suspicion because it was new. I ended up using Yahoo, and let me tell you, it's not much better now than it was then. A couple hours of searching left me with no clues. I could find no mention of either Callie's episode or mine anywhere. I let it lie there. There have been a couple series since then. Bears have come and gone, but Grumpy has always been there from what little I've seen, largely unchanged. Sometimes I wonder if there are OT-hers out there who saw strange episodes as each series finished out. Deep down, I don't really want to know. I think if I did know, I'd have to accept some facts I really don't want to. Snapping out of my reverie, I got ready to leave the toy aisle. I turned back one last time to look at the bears, and then, almost on impulse, I reached down and picked up the grumpy bear. Perhaps I owed him that much, and perhaps there were worse things that could snuggle next to my niece as she slept. Story 6. The Awful Thing We Did to Eliza. Dad said a man was coming from the city to photograph us tomorrow. I never had a photograph taken of me before. My parents had one taken with James when he was a baby. Eliza and I weren't born yet. The picture sits over our mantel, embroidered in a gold frame. Dad always promised he'd have one taken of all of us when he had the money. He'd say we'd have one of our whole family together. Now he says it's better late than never. Yeah, Mies and I are in the living room, drawing. Mom and Dad are seated at the kitchen table, drinking water and tea leaves. Mom is crying quietly. Catherine, Dad says we can't let this kill us. It's the best we could do. We could have done better, Mom mumbles. A better doctor, something. She trails off. There isn't anything we could have done differently, Dad says. We did what we could with the time we had. The Lord needed her back. Mom lets out a moan. Upstairs, Eliza is in her best Sunday dress. My mother made her look very pretty, like she's sleeping. Dr. Coffet came to visit a few days ago. Eliza was moaning for hours before my mother had come in to take care of her, and I was to move to James' room. All night I heard her retching. When Dr. Coffet was leaving the next day, I asked him what was wrong with her. Well, sweetheart, your little sister is very sick, but I promise you I'll do everything I can. He smiled, the lazy smile at him. I counted the gold teeth. After he leaves, Mother tells me Eliza has a bad fever. She tells me I can go up and see her if I like, but not to wake her. The stairs creak as I climb. It's dark upstairs, and very still. I reached our room and quietly opened the door. The two windows on the other side of the room had the shades drawn, blocking out almost all the sun. Even though our room was facing it, tiny rays fell at the foot of Eliza's bed where she lay, hidden except for her face. Her forehead was red and wet, her dark hair matted against it. I touched it. It was so hot. She was breathing quickly. Why, the man from the city is downstairs. He and Dad talk about how much a daguerreotype photograph costs. Mother and I are in Eliza's and my room. She is brushing Eliza's hair. I put the flowers we picked today around her. I don't like looking at her. I've seen a dead person before. I was at my Uncle Yet's burial. He was killed by two men who robbed his house. He ran after them, and they shot him dead. But even with those little holes in his cheek and the black circles under his eyes, I could tell there was something certain, definite about him. Eliza didn't have that. She very well could have been alive, except for that stillness. It was the stillness which scared me. All the signs of her sleeping were there, save for the gentle up and down motion of her chest and the light whistle of air from her nostrils. When you see a behavior so many times, you begin to expect all the signs to be present. Seeing such a vital few missing was disconcerting. My mind tries to make sense of it, but the effort brings on a slow, tired, nauseous feeling. I want to leave the room. Catherine, are you ready? Dad's voice echoes from downstairs. We are. Mom's voice breaks and doesn't carry. Yes, Dad, I finish. Footsteps begin on the stairs. Dad enters, followed by the man with the camera. James slips in behind them, looking as though he didn't think he should be here or didn't want to be here. I couldn't tell which. The man with the camera is very tall, like Dad, with dark hair and a thick, dark beard. His face could have been whittled from wood. It was so lined. He looks from me to Eliza and steps over to the bed to examine her. If, as you say, he says in a thick German accent, gesturing to my father, you would like to make this a picture of the family rather than a memorial, I will need to decorate the girl to make her appear alive. He takes a small paint set from his pocket. I will decorate her eyes to make them appear open. If this is acceptable, my father looks to my mother, who, holding a tissue to her eyes, nods. Turning, he descends to one knee beside Eliza's bed. His back is to us. A few minutes later, he stands up and says, I believe she is ready. We look behind him at Eliza. The man had painted a set of eyes onto her eyelids. Thin black paint outlined the shape, in the middle of which sat a brown iris around jet black pupils. He had also drawn thin flecks over the eyes for eyelashes. They weren't grotesque or frightening. They were just off. Eliza's eyes were blue, not brown. But that wasn't it. Mom once said between life and death was a barrier, a wall which we cross over only once. The eyes on Eliza seemed to bring her back over that wall, even if the eyes were a little abnormal. I felt a mixture of hope and uneasiness. The man asks if we're ready. As we group together around Eliza's bed, the man, now behind the camera, says, one more thing. The exposure will take 40 to 50 seconds, so if you will please remain as still as possible in order to minimize any blurriness. I supposed Eliza's face would come out crystal clear. On the count of 3, Eliza was buried the next day. We held a funeral for her at St. Catherine's Church and buried her in the graveyard next to it. Mom howled when the casket was closed. I guess it's because that's when she knew she wouldn't ever see Eliza again. The tiny coffin looked very odd to me, James, my dad, and to men I did. Carried her outside. I could tell James was struggling with the back corner, but he still did all right. A lot of people came out, all wearing black. Eliza was in white. They washed the paint off her eyes before they put her in. She still made me uncomfortable. I didn't know why. We put the photograph in its own gold frame. It was put right in the middle of the mantel. It was always nice to walk by and look at. It was helpful to remember what she looked like. You stop seeing a person and for some reason their face begins to fade. You can't quite remember what they looked like, or the specific features that made them them. A few weeks later, I was looking at the photograph again. I did it less often now, but I still stopped from time to time. I was looking at Eliza, but I was also looking at myself. I liked seeing my face. I knew what I looked like, but somehow seeing my face in the photograph was different from looking in a mirror or seeing your reflection in a pond. I also felt badly because I knew Eliza would never see a picture of herself. She would never know what she looked like when she was younger. She would never watch age herself grow up. Hot tears burn in my eyes as I look at her painted eyes behind the gray of the picture. A look on her face, and almost sad. I stopped. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I started to feel cold. Something was out of place. Something was wrong. I stared at Eliza's face, just above the blankets, looking for tea. He thing that had registered growing dread in my subconscious, but which I couldn't readily focus on. It was something instinctual I felt. I knew fear, but I didn't know why. I asked, squinted at the photograph, at the thinness of her cheeks made even more apparent in the light from the camera, at her pursed lips and her drawn-on eyes. I knew I was looking right at it, but I couldn't see it. I felt as if I were lost in the woods at night, knowing there was something just beyond my eyesight, something monstrous and heinous glaring back at me, grinning as I frantically searched for it, knowing I can't find it. As I stared at the photograph, my fear turned slowly to dark, clammy terror. Nausea rolled over me. My hands quivered, and for my own life I did not know what was wrong. And then I saw it. I saw it because I remembered what the man with the camera had said that day, what I had thought, and that fact slid slowly into place in the forefront of my mind, like a heavy gray stone. The idea clicked solidly with my fear of something terribly unnatural, terribly wrong, and my primal fear was suddenly explained. The room spun as the realization dawned upon me. As numb shock crashed into me, I wondered how I couldn't have noticed it before, as I recalled how many weeks it's been since the burial, and how tired or drunk Dr. Coffet had looked the last time he came by. As wrenching disbelief crept up my spine, and every nerve in my body fired blank terror. Eliza was blurry. Story 7. Reflection. Unless you wish to experience the endless nights without sleep, the painful insomnia sent from the devil himself, don't look. If you're one of those lucky enough to fall asleep after such an experience as mine, then why? You'll realize it soon. You'll soon wake in the middle of the night, screaming with the agony from the torturous nightmares. You'll have no choice but to endure. But there is one way to save yourself. You simply cannot look. Please, please heed my advice. Friend, don't look into your bedroom mirror at night while the lights are off. On one wretched night I had been out late with some friends at a bachelorette party in order to stay up for the fun. I had drank about 5 cups of coffee, the biggest mistake of my life. We ended up staying at a club until about 1 in the morning, and then by that time we had decided to go home. Well, once I had arrived at my house, I had realized just how wired I still was from all the caffeine. I was wide awake. That was going to be a problem. I had to be up by 7 in the morning to get ready for my friend's bridal rehearsal, so I really needed to get some sleep. And unfortunately for me, I tried to. I went to my room and quickly changed into a comfortable t-shirt and some shorts. Then I walked over to a large full-length mirror I had in my room and stared at myself for a moment, taking in the view of myself in my Twitter content that I was just about ready for bed. I began to turn toward my bedroom door, but stopped dead in my tracks for a moment when a strange feeling washed over me. I shuddered and scanned the room with confusion. I didn't know why, but I had the feeling that I was being watched. I mean, I know everyone sort of has that kind of paranoia once in a while, but this somehow felt different. It felt too real, as though someone were actually standing in my room and staring at me, drilling holes into the back of my head. I turned my head and looked behind me, but no one as there my reflection wore the same confused look that I did, trying to shake off the feeling. I headed over to the bathroom. I walked into my dark bathroom with the intent of brushing my teeth before going to bed. I slid my hand along the wall and searched for the light switch. I always had trouble finding it for some reason, but it only took a couple of seconds. My fingers soon met something on the wall, but it felt strange. It was cold and soft. Definitely not a light switch. I quickly retracted my hand, a surprised and perplexed expression forming on my face. There shouldn't have been anything on that wall except for the light switch. In a quick motion, I pushed the bathroom door open wide, hoping to shed some more light and find whatever my hand had touched on the wall. My head spun back to the wall, and I jumped when I thought I spotted something out of the corner of my eye. It was only for a split second, but I could have sworn that I saw something protruding out of the mirror. I quickly found the light switch and sighed with relief when the light poured out from the overhead bulbs. I then turned my attention immediately to the wall. All that was there was a light switch, nothing else. I leaned up against the door frame and looked around as I raised a nervous hand to my neck. My eyes surveyed the scene and landed on the mirror that was directly in front of me. My reflection was as perplexed as ever, looking really uncomfortable and almost worried. I moved my hand to my forehead and wiped my sweaty brow, forcing a little laugh as I scolded myself. I was being ridiculous, acting like an easily frightened child. I shook my head and reached for my toothbrush. When I walked back into my room, I noticed just how much of a mess my bed was. There were clothes strewn about it and about 1,000,000 shopping bags from the previous day's spree littering it. Had it really been like that this morning? I actually left it like that. I felt like such a slob, but really didn't feel like organizing the mess at 2 in the morning. I went and retrieved a couple of blankets from the closet and found a spot on the floor a few feet in front of my full-length mirror that wasn't scattered with articles of clothing. I folded the blankets into a sort of makeshift sleeping bag and finished it off by plopping my pillow down at the end. It looked so comfortable, and I was certain that I'd be able to fall asleep in no time at all. With that thought in mind, I went to close my bedroom door and shut off my overhead light, and then shuffled into my cozy cocoon. I laid on my stomach and crossed my arms over my pillow as I faced my mirror, gazing back at myself in total comfort. I looked so relaxed, and soon I closed my eyes. The clock read 2:13 a.m. After a couple of minutes of lying in silence, I heard a car door slam in the driveway next door. I knew the sound had been made by my neighbors, since a couple of seconds later a spotlight illuminated, casting a stream of dim light through the blinds of my window. I was usually okay with the spotlight, as it had never disturbed my slumber before, but due to my new position on the floor, light had found a clear path to my eyelids, penetrating them to the point where I had become mildly annoyed. I slowly opened an eye and glanced up at the window. I sighed, waiting for the light to die out, but it didn't, feeling more annoyed. I rolled my eyes, and in an instant they rested on my mirror. At that moment, my breathing stopped. I couldn't close my eyes, and I could yet look away. I was frozen. Staring back at me through the glass was my reflection. On any other occasion this wouldn't have chilled me, but this time it was different. My reflection, its eyes were watching me, and I don't mean the average look your reflection is supposed to return. Oh no, this was something completely different. Its eyes were wide open, much wider than I could ever make them. The sight paralyzed me, but only momentarily. I just figured that I had startled myself, trying to avoid eye contact with my own image. I closed my eyes and tried to get back to sleep. The clock read to 25 a.m. I didn't make any progress in my attempts. As the minutes continued to pass, the clock ticked steadily in its place on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. The light from my neighbor's driveway still hadn't turned off. My aggravation was beginning to build. At this rate, I wouldn't get any shut-eye. Feeling hopeless, I opened my eyes and nearly jumped out my skin when I looked into the mirror again. My reflection was staring at me with those same wide, intense eyes, but it wasn't only that. Its eyes were now completely bloodshot, and its mouth was contorted into a menacing scowl. It looked like a rabid predator staring at its prey after days of looking for it. It was terrifying, but that wasn't the only reason the view had alarmed me. I didn't know if it was just my imagination or not, but it looked as though my reflection had gotten closer to the mirror. I was so scared I could hardly move, but I had to avert my eyes. I had to. I quickly pulled he blanket up over my head, my breathing now heavy. I tightly closed my eyes, praying that I had only imagined the image. It had seemed so real and so evil, like it actually wanted to hurt me. But the very thought was insane. It was an image in a mirror, my reflection. It wasn't real. It was just a copy. It was just another me. At that moment I heard the all-too-familiar creaking sound of my bedroom door being opened slowly behind me. I froze under the covers. I lived alone. With a shaky hand I lifted the blanket just slightly to peek out. I peered into the mirror at the door behind me, and my eyes instantly grew wide in fear. The door was slightly ajar, but that wasn't the part that terrified me. My reflection wasn't in the mirror anymore. I was now a thing heavier than I ever had before, my whole body shaking in fright. I sat up and quickly reached for the baseball bat that laid on the floor beside a pile of magazines. I heard the door creak again, and I spun around to face it, the bat now in hand and ready to be used if necessary. Who's there? I stammered loudly, the fear in my voice ringing out. There was no answer. I repeated myself, now on the verge of tears, and still there was no answer. I was about to slide out of my covers when the door suddenly slammed shut. I jumped and dropped my bat, falling backward onto my elbows, inches from the mirror. My fear level was through the roof. My heart was beating uncontrollably. I had a major headache now, and I began to quietly sob. And that's when I heard it, a low growl. It gurgled into my eardrums, a guttural sound, and it most certainly was not that of a human's. Then I felt the hot breath on the back of my neck. I never had the chance to scream. My neighbor's spotlight died out. The clock read 3 a.m.